Rain drummed steadily on the rusted roof of the gatehouse, a dull rhythm that matched the unease in Grace's chest. She stood motionless before the towering iron gate, her threadbare bag slung over one shoulder, water soaking the hem of her skirt. Beyond the bars loomed the Adamola mansion, 3 stories of whitewashed stone, ringed with bougainvillea and secrets. Even the rain didn't dare touch its gleaming windows. Grace had only seen houses like this on television, never in her reality of overcrowded shacks and restless hunger. She had no idea what lay ahead, only that Madame Toque had chosen her. A distant sound cut through the patter of Raina baby's cry, faint and stifled. Grace lifted her head. Was it coming from inside the mansion? Her brows furrowed. There were no children on the staff list she'd heard. Before she could dwell on it, the gates creaked open with mechanical precision. Madame Toque stood at the entrance like a statue carved from ice. Her sharp features were framed by a silk scarf, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses, despite the grey sky. You'll answer when called. You don't speak unless spoken to, she said, not as a greeting, but a command. Grace nodded, her lips pressed into a line. No one told her what she would truly be walking into. The first few days blurred together, polishing marble floors until her knees bled, laundering sheets she never slept in, enduring the indifference of the other staff who had long since buried their empathy. But Grace worked hard and said little, as instructed. Still, the baby's cry haunted her dreams. She had asked once about it, only to be met with a clipped, "Don't ask questions that don't concern you." It was a week later, on a night so quiet it felt like the world had paused, that she heard it again, this time clearer, nearer, a soft wail, not of pain, but of abandonment. Drawn like a moth to flame, Grace slipped from her shared quarters and followed the sound down the back corridors to a disused wing of the house. There, behind a locked door in the old servant quarters, she found a cot, dusty and barely fit for a child. Inside was a baby no more than 8 months old, pale eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. He did not flinch when she entered, but his cries stopped the moment she touched his tiny hand. The child was blind and utterly alone. In hushed whispers among the maids, she pieced together the truth. This was David, the hidden child of Madame Toque's late husband, born of a scandal that nearly destroyed the family's name. Rather than risk exposure, the boy had been hidden away, fed and clothed, but deprived of love, of light, of the world. Something cracked open in Grace's heart. She begged to care for him, not officially, not in any capacity that would grant her safety or respect. Just to hold him, to soothe him. She was 17, barely a woman herself, but already she knew what it meant to be discarded. And so, quietly, secretly, she became David's mother. By day. Grace scrubbed the house's gleaming floors under the cold eyes of Madame Toque, but at night, when shadows swallowed the marble halls, she would return to that forgotten room, singing lullabies her own mother once sang. David would nestle into her chest, his small fingers grasping at the only warmth he knew. In a mansion built on cruelty and shame, love flickered where no one cared to look. Grace was born with nothing but her name, and even that, over time, had been stripped down to something barely whispered. The slums of Ajegunle knew her as the girl who fetched water for neighbors, who stitched her school uniform by candlelight, who never cried even when hunger gnawed at her ribs. Her parents died in a road accident when she was 12, leaving her at the mercy of an uncle whose grief quickly curdled into resentment. Within months, she was sold to an agency that found homes for poor girls' homes that paid in silence, not wages. By 13, she was scrubbing the kitchens of strangers. By 15, she had stopped looking into mirrors, afraid of what they might tell her. Yet Grace never let the world dim her inner light. She read anything she could get her hands on: old newspapers, wrappers with words still legible, discarded books with torn covers. She watched people carefully, learning their moods, their needs, and how to stay invisible when necessary. Her body obeyed commands, but her mind wandered freely, collecting dreams like secrets. Then came the Adamola mansion and the child locked away from the world. David was not supposed to exist, and everyone made that clear. From the moment Grace found him in the disused servant quarters, pallid, fragile, reaching out into darkness, something awakened in her. He didn't cry like a normal baby. His cries were questions, his silence heavier than most adult sorrow. He was blind. Yes, but he was not broken. She named him in her heart before she knew his real name, David, like the biblical boy who faced giants. Grace became his world, his window, his rhythm. She would sneak bits of cloth and thread to create textured shapes, guiding his fingers over them to teach him touch and recognition. She found an old book in Braille, hidden in a storage room meant for donation, yellowed pages curling at the corners. Night after night, she pressed his small hands to the dots, whispering their meanings until he began to read with his fingertips. She told him stories of ancient kings, of Mandela in prison, of Nigerian heroes whose names were not allowed in Madame Toke's house. And when her voice caught in her throat, David would place his hand on her cheek and ask what happened. Next, in the harsh corridors of the mansion, Madame Toke ruled with detachment and disdain. A woman consumed with legacy and appearances, she treated David like a cursed reminder of her husband's betrayal. You know, he should have never been born, she once spat at Grace, eyes glinting with disgust. I should have sent him away the moment he came out blind. Grace learned then never to trust kindness from such lips. She nodded, pretended to agree, and kept David hidden in plain sight, always dressed plainly, always quiet, always slow. She lied with a soft face and obedient eyes, telling the staff he doesn't speak much, while secretly rehearsing speeches with him in the dark. His voice, when it finally grew strong, was calm and clear. He pronounced words like a prince. Grace told him, "Your voice is a gift, and one day the world will hear it." David's questions became more complex with time. Why can't I go outside like other children? He asked once, head tilted toward the sound of a bird he could never see. Why don't I have a father? He whispered another night, clinging to Grace after Madame Toke had slammed the door without a word. Grace never lied to him, but she didn't give him the whole truth either. She painted hope with her words, sketched dreams he could believe in. You will go outside, she promised, brushing his hair back, and you will speak to crowds. People will know your name not because of where you come from, but because of who you are. There were days Grace wanted to scream, to tear down the gates that kept David locked away, but she had learned patience from pain. She knew that true change did not come from sudden explosions, came like water wearing down stone, quiet, persistent, unstoppable. In the eyes of the Adamolas, she was a nobody, a maid whose name they rarely bothered to remember. But in David's world, she was everything: teacher, protector, mother, Their bond was forged in whispers and lullabies, in shared meals snuck beneath the silence of the mansion. Every time Grace taught him something new, how to tell time by sound, how to spell his name, she felt like she was rewriting fate, one gentle act at a time. Even when Madame Toque hovered like a shadow, threatening to send the boy far away, Grace stood firm behind her silence. She would not let them take him, not while her heart still beat. She held him close one night, the rain falling like it did the day she arrived. David was quiet, his arms wrapped around her like he never wanted to let go. "Will you always be here?" he asked, his voice trembling. Grace kissed his forehead and whispered, "As long as I breathe. And even after that, my voice will be in your stories." And he smiled, for he believed her. It happened on a blistering afternoon, the kind where the Lagos heat pressed against your skin like punishment. Grace was in the side garden, coaching David through one of their secret lessons. He stood proudly beneath the shade of a mango tree, barefoot, eyes closed, reciting a speech from a book Grace had salvaged, something about justice, spoken in clear, confident English. Neither of them heard Remy approaching, home from university. With a swagger that reeked of entitlement, Remy was used to being the golden child, untouched by consequence. He stopped short, arms folded, watching with disgust as the blind boy spoke with more grace than he ever had. "What the hell is this?" he snapped, and Grace turned sharply, her instinct pulling David behind her. Minutes later, Madame Toque came storming in, her heels clicking like gunfire against the pavement. Without a word, she slapped Grace so hard, her head snapped to the side. The staff gasped, frozen. "You ungrateful thing," Toque hissed, trembling with rage. "You dare teach that mistake to speak like a prince." Grace tried to explain, to beg, to protect, but the woman's fury was deafening. "You're fired. Get out of my house. And take your charity case with you." David clutched Grace's skirt, shaking with confusion. "Please," Grace whispered, voice cracking, "let me stay for him." Madame Toque only sneered, her voice ice cold. "That boy isn't your child. He's nothing." And just like that, 7 years of silence, sacrifice, and secret love were dismissed with a slap and a sentence. Grace walked out of the Adamola mansion with David pressed to her side, carrying nothing but a plastic bag of clothes and the weight of a shattered world. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't let him feel the abandonment she knew too well. The city swallowed them quickly, noise, heat, and indifference. By nightfall, they stumbled into a rundown church with broken pews and a leaking roof. The old pastor, Papa Elijah, took one look at Grace's swollen cheek and David's fragile frame and said nothing, only opened the door to a small, dusty back room and handed her a key. That night, Grace lay beside David on a mat laid over cracked tiles, brushing his hair as he slept. She knew the real struggle had just begun. No job, no money, no protection from the cruelty of the world. But in that tiny room, for the first time, Grace felt something stronger than fear, purpose. She had saved David from a prison of shame. Now, she would raise him in the world that had tried to forget him. Life outside the mansion was nothing like the slow, silent cruelty of the Adamola estate. It was louder, harsher, and unforgiving. Grace quickly learned that the real world did not stop to pity a girl with no education or a blind boy clinging to her hand. They slept in the back room of Papa Elijah's crumbling church, where rats scurried through the pews at night and the roof leaked when it rained. Grace worked tirelessly cleaning toilets in nearby schools, scrubbing market stalls before sunrise, and taking on any job that could pay for rice, soap, and second-hand clothes. Her hands became cracked and raw, her back stiff from exhaustion. Still, every night, she returned to their tiny room and held David close, telling him stories, pressing cheap cassette tapes into his eager hands, guiding his fingers over the pages of tattered books. By 12, he had read more philosophy than most adults she knew. Despite his blindness and, maybe because of it, David listened deeply. He absorbed ideas like rain in dry soil, memorizing the speeches of Mandela, Iwalawa, and Martin Luther King with uncanny precision. But the world outside didn't see brilliance. They saw weakness. David was mocked on the streets, shoved by impatient conductors in crowded buses, called names by schoolboys who mistook blindness for inferiority. Grace tried to protect him, shielding his ears, holding his hand tighter. Yet, David never cried. He stood a little taller with every insult, sharpening his tongue, his mind, his will. "They think I'm small," he would say, "but they're blind, not me." When he was 15, a small local radio station announced a speech competition for students with disabilities. David begged Grace to let him enter. She hesitated, terrified of exposing him again, but finally agreed, scraping together the last of their money to buy a proper shirt and transport fare. David spoke on air without notes, his voice calm, eloquent, stirring. "Being blind doesn't mean I can't see a better Nigeria," he declared. "It only means I know how to listen, something our leaders have forgotten." The broadcast exploded online. Within days, his voice went viral, reposted by activists, quoted by students, even played in classrooms across the state. Invitations flooded in, to schools, youth summits, radio panels. People were stunned by the clarity of his words, the way he made blindness seem like a gift rather than a curse. But in another part of the city, Remi Ademola, now a rising star in state politics, dressed in agbedas and corruption, was rising, for all the wrong reasons. Using his mother's influence and his father's name, he climbed the political ladder with rehearsed charm and dirty money. When he heard David's name circulating, he didn't think much of it until a journalist named Amaka came knocking. Curious and tenacious, Amaka began connecting dots, uncovering whispers of a child once hidden in the Ademola mansion, a boy born blind and illegitimate. Her digging stirred the waters Madame Toke had spent years trying to keep still. When Madame Toke finally saw David's face on a newspaper article head held high, microphone in hand, her fury was immediate. She called in favors, sent men in black cars to the church, their voices sharp with menace. "Tell your boy to stop talking," one of them warned Grace in the dark alley behind her workplace, "or we'll finish what we started years ago." They didn't touch her, but the message was clear. She returned to the church, trembling, her past rushing back like a tide she had fought for years to hold back. She tried to smile when David came home from a school event, tried to cook his favorite beans and yam, tried to laugh when he told her a joke, but he saw through her. He always did. That night, as the rain tapped gently on the windows, David sat across from her and said, "I heard them." His voice was soft, but his expression was stone. "They said I should stop, that I shouldn't speak. Why? Who are they, Grace?" She tried to deny it, to deflect, but her strength failed her. The truth, buried for so long, cracked and spilled out of her like a dam giving way. With shaking hands, She told him everything, the affair, the shame, the decision to hide him. That his father was a powerful senator who died before acknowledging him, that Madame Toque never saw him as a child, only a stain, that he had a half-brother named Remy, the same Remy now sitting at the table of power, desperate to keep secrets buried. David sat in silence, eyes staring into the darkness. "So, that's why I wasn't allowed outside," he whispered. "That's why you cried when I asked about my father." Grace reached for him, but he pulled back gently. "All this time, you carried it alone." Asterisk tears streamed down her face. "I did it to protect you," she said. "I just wanted you to have a chance. I didn't want them to break you like they tried to break me." Asterisk, he stood slowly, finding her hand, and this time, he held it tight. "They don't get to decide who I become," he said, "and I'm not hiding anymore." Asterisk, in that moment, Grace saw not the boy she had raised, but the man he was becoming. Blind, yes, but guided by something far brighter than sight, purpose, rage, and love. The world had tried to silence them both, but David was ready to speak louder than ever before. Asterisk, at 35, David stood on the cusp of something far greater than survival. He was now running for local government chairman in his district, a position small in name but mighty in influence. His campaign was unlike anything the city had seen, raw, honest, and grounded in the very pain he had overcome. He didn't promise miracles, he promised integrity. His platform centered on transparency, education reform, and empowering the youth often ignored by the elite. Grace, older now, but still his guiding light, watched from the sidelines with quiet pride. But the shadows of his past had not vanished. From Abuja, Remy Ademola, now a polished senator with access to endless resources and a lifetime of unchecked privilege, watched David's rise with growing contempt. He had once dismissed the boy as a blind embarrassment. Now, that embarrassment was a real threat. Determined to crush the movement, Remy's camp unleashed a storm of fake scandals, forged documents, doctored videos, false witnesses claiming David had embezzled NGO funds. The tactics were dirty, but David stood his ground. "Let them throw mud," he told Grace. "The truth will shine through." Asterisk, then came the debate. It was to be aired live across the nation, a chance for all candidates to present their vision. The auditorium buzzed with reporters, students, political analysts, and millions more watching from home. Remy walked in, draped in arrogance, his agbada crisp, his smile smug. David stood tall beside him, cane in hand, sunglasses hiding his eyes but not his confidence. For most of the debate, Remy threw jabs cloaked in sarcasm. But toward the end, he struck directly. "How do you plan to lead a people when you can't even see them?" he said, a smirk tugging at his lips. A hush fell. Then David leaned forward, his voice calm, piercing, unforgettable. Asterisk, my brother sees with his eyes. He began, pausing as the word brother landed like a spark. But I see with my soul. He inherited power. I earned voice. He was born into comfort, yet forgot compassion. I was born into darkness, but I found light. You can read a paper with your eyes, Senator, but can you read a nation's pain? Can you see corruption in your own mirror? Leadership is not sight, it is vision. The auditorium erupted. Online, the clip was shared, clipped, quoted, translated. I see with my soul became a slogan, a movement. Asterisk, the next day, the final blow came not from David, but from Amika, the journalist who had spent years chasing truth. She released her findings with careful timing, a certified DNA test proving that David was indeed the biological son of the late Senator Toke and half-brother to Remy. The evidence was irrefutable. The nation reeled. What had been a compelling political race transformed into a family reckoning. People were stunned to learn that the blind orator they had come to admire was the hidden child of one of Nigeria's most powerful families, cast aside, erased, and now rising from the ashes. Remy's world began to collapse. The DNA revelation reopened long-buried investigations, and soon evidence of his embezzlement, bribery, and land theft surfaced. The Senate launched a formal probe. Within weeks, he resigned, disgraced. Madame Toke, once untouchable, found herself the target of public outrage. Her carefully crafted image, benevolent philanthropist, grieving widow, shattered under the weight of truth. Protesters camped outside her estate, demanding accountability. TV anchors replayed her old interviews with brutal irony. She disappeared from public view, issuing a single statement through her lawyer: no comment. Meanwhile, David's support soared. But more than admiration, the public felt something deep. Here was a man born in shame, raised in silence, yet refusing to become bitter or broken. A man who used words not to wound, but to awaken. Grace, watching from the crowd as he gave his first official speech after winning the election, felt her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of relief. All the years of hiding, of sacrificing, of walking the tightrope between love and danger, it had led to this. David stood behind the podium, his fingers tracing the notes in Braille, and said, "I was hidden behind a gate for years. Now I stand before you because someone believed I was worth more than silence. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that truth is louder than shaman. Truth always finds the light." And the nation, weary from lies, leaned in to listen. The morning of the inauguration dawned with a quiet sense of history. The streets were filled with people, some waving small flags, others holding posters with David's face and the words, "Truth is louder than shame." It had been 5 years since his first election win, 5 years of tireless work reforming education policies, ensuring that disabled children had access to schools, healthcare, and opportunities long denied to them. He pushed through laws that required public buildings to be accessible, created community libraries with Braille sections, and built mentorship programs that paired street children with young professionals. What began in a cramped church room had grown into a national movement. And now, against all odds, David Ademola had won the presidency with a landslide. The blind boy once hidden behind mansion gates was now the leader of a nation. At his side stood Grace, now in her 50s, her hair touched with silver, her eyes still sharp with quiet strength. She wore a simple dress, no makeup, no ornaments, just the pride of a woman who had walked through fire and carried a child through it too. As David walked onto the stage, the roar of the crowd seemed to fade. In his ears, he could still hear Grace's lullabies in the dark, her whispered encouragements, the way her fingers had guided his across torn books and broken ground. Now, the world saw a president, but Grace still saw her boy, the one she had once begged to care for, the one she had shielded with her body and soul. When David stepped up to take the oath, his hand raised, the silence was electric. Cameras flashed, flags fluttered, and a country held its breath. And then he spoke, his voice clear and sure across every speaker in the land. "I was not born to power. I was not raised in privilege. I was raised by a woman the world called worthless, but she saw greatness in me when no one else would. In that moment, as tears welled in Grace's eyes, flashes of the past flickered through her mind like scenes from a silent film. Her as a girl with scraped knees and empty pockets, cradling a blind baby in a room with no electricity, humming lullabies to drown out the cruelty beyond the walls. The cameras caught it, the quiet moment when David reached for Grace's hand, squeezing it gently as he smiled. This nation has waited long for leaders who serve with soul, not sight. Today, I lead not because I see the world, but because I have learned to feel it deeply. The crowd erupted, and far beyond the capital, on radios in dusty villages, on phones in crowded markets, millions heard the voice of a man who had once been voiceless. Grace stood beside him as the anthem played, her heart full not with pride alone, but with peace. She had once scrubbed floors with David strapped to her back. Now she stood on the presidential podium beside the child no one had wanted, watching him become a beacon for those who had been told they were too poor, too broken, too invisible. She had no title, no wealth, no recognition, but she had changed a nation because she loved one boy enough to believe that he mattered. And in the eyes of a people ready for healing, that love had changed everything. The evening air at the presidential villa was calm, the weight of ceremony and celebration finally settling into silence. On the wide veranda, overlooking the twinkling lights of the Capitol below, Grace sat alone, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze lost in thought. The sounds of the day, applause, speeches, national anthems had faded, leaving only the soft hum of crickets and the slow creak of her chair. She had always found comfort in quiet places. Even now, in the heart of power, she longed for the simplicity of the church room where David first learned to speak with conviction. David appeared beside her, dressed down now, the tie gone, the weight of office momentarily shed. He didn't speak at first, just took the seat next to her, their presence filling the silence more than any words could. Finally, he reached for her hand, calloused like his, but warm, steady. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, his voice low, honest. Grace turned to him, eyes soft, proud, tired in the way only mothers know. "I didn't raise a president," she said gently, squeezing his hand. "I raised a man." They sat there together, not as a head of state and his guardian, but simply as mother and son, bound not by blood alone, but by years of invisible battles, whispered lullabies, an impossible hope. Behind them, mounted on the wall just above the veranda steps, a small bronze plaque caught the moonlight. Its inscription, elegant and simple, read, raised in silence, spoke for millions. Their silhouettes held still against the night. Sky, the glow of the city stretching far below them, reminder of how far they had come from that tall iron gate, from that hidden room, from the dark years no one saw. And though the world would remember David as the president who changed a nation, he knew the truth that mattered most sat beside him in quiet dignity. The woman who had once scrubbed floors with a blind child in her arms and gave the world its voice.